In the Arctic, researchers find a plane in the ice. Having examined the icy debris, they find a very interesting find inside. 1942, Norway. Johann Schmidt, a German army officer, captured a village to get a mysterious artifact. The Tesseract is the pearl of Odin's treasury.
It's not for the eyes of ordinary men.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, at the Brooklyn Military Registration and Enlistment Office, a young guy, Steve Rogers, undergoes a medical examination in order to volunteer to join the army to defend his homeland. But due to many illnesses, he is refused. At a movie theater, Steve very boldly asks the loud-talking thug to shut up. He is absolutely not afraid of consequences, but naturally, he gets punched in the face.
Just don't know when to give up, do you?
I can do this all day.
Steve is saved by his best friend Bucky, who brags about being recruited into the army. In the evening, they take 2 girls with them and go to a science exhibition. But Steve, instead of going to the dance, again thinks only about how to get into the army. Bucky doesn't understand his motives, but Steve's upbringing means he can't sit at home while guys like him give their lives in the war. Their conversation is heard by scientist Abraham Erskine. Steve says goodbye to Bucky, and then again, illegally tries to pass the medical examination. But Dr. Erskine comes to him and asks a question. Do you want to kill Nazis? Steve replies that he doesn't want to kill anyone. He just hates scum, and it doesn't matter who they are. The doctor gives him the necessary category mark in the journal, and leaves. Meanwhile, Schmidt and his assistant scientist Arnim Zola use the Tesseract to gain energy, and the experiment goes well. Private Rogers and other recruits arrive at a military camp where they are met by Agent Peggy Carter. She quickly makes it clear to the Boer who is in charge here. Colonel Phillips also arrives and explains that they are all competitors and are participating in the selection for a special scientific program. Military training begins. Steve, of course, performs worse than everyone else due to his physical shape and genetics. However, being smarter than the others, he completes a difficult task and goes to the base with Peggy. This greatly impresses the doctor, and he tells the colonel that all this training is actually pointless because he has already made his choice. The colonel does not understand why he needs a skinny asthmatic. Erskine says that he needs human qualities other than physical strength. The colonel takes a dummy grenade. He burns that courage is needed in war and throws it into the crowd of cadets.
Grenade!
Everyone runs away, but only Steve throws himself at the grenade, covering it with his body to save his comrades. Now the colonel understands what qualities the doctor was talking about. In the evening, the doc tells Steve about Schmidt, who conducted an experiment on himself to become a Superman. The serum worked, but there were side effects. The next day, Steve goes to the procedure to become the first super soldier. He tells Peggy that in almost every one of these gateways he was beaten. She asks, why didn't he run away? To which Steve replies,
If you start running, they'll never let you stop.
Peggy is the only girl in Steve's life who paid attention to him. They arrive at a secret laboratory, and Steve undergoes a procedure. He takes her out and is transformed beyond recognition. But the joy of a successful experiment is overshadowed by a secret agent who kills the doctor. Peggy runs after him and manages to slightly detain the killer. Steve immediately runs after him. His speed is now enough to catch up with the car. Steve catches up with the agent. He takes him out of the submarine, but does not have time to ask anything. A Nazi bites through a cyanide ampoule to commit suicide. Meanwhile, Schmidt, having harnessed the power of the Tesseract, kills the generals to test the functionality of the new invention. Due to the death of Dr. Erskine, it is impossible to continue work on creating super soldiers. Management decides that Steve cannot participate in real combat operations because his blood is of high value. The best engineer in the country, Howard Stark, studied the German submarine and says that such technologies have no analogues in the world. The colonel says that they have a new order to attack the Hydra while it is possible. The commander does not take Steve with him but finds a new job for him. He becomes Captain America, now Steve Actor, who campaigns to attract large numbers of volunteers into the army. He acts in films, commercials, comics are published about him, and Steve quite likes it. However, real soldiers do not applaud him. Peggy arrives and says that Steve is meant for more. Peggy says that Hydra recently almost completely destroyed the 107th Infantry Squad. Steve, hearing this, remembers that Bucky was in this squad. He runs to the colonel and learns that there will be no operation to free the prisoners because the Hydra base is well fortified. Steve decides to go himself to rescue his friend from captivity. Peggy and Howard Stark help Steve get as close to the base as possible. He deals with a couple of guards and manages to sneak in and free the prisoners. And while they are fighting for their freedom, Steve continues his search for Baka. The prisoners manage to capture enemy equipment and deal with the Nazis, and Schmidt, realizing that the base cannot be given away, turns on self-destruction. Steve finds Bucky in some laboratory. While trying to get out, they stumble upon Schmidt and engage in a fight, after which he reveals a side effect of his super serum. Then he leaves. Bucky and Steve get out of there alive, along with other prisoners. Steve becomes a real hero by proving that he is worthy of fighting. The Colonel is glad that Steve disobeyed him. Now they are planning a new operation for him, and he decides to take with him the guys who got out of the Hydra base with him. Peggy comes to Steve and hints that he should ask her to the dance, and Bucky is simply shocked that Peggy didn't even look in his direction. Steve comes to test equipment and is kissed by his secretary. Peggy sees this and becomes very jealous, and then tests a new shield made of vibranium, made from the strongest, lightest, and rarest metal on Earth. Captain America and his team begin to destroy Hydra bases one after another. Soon their important goal becomes a train, which they manage to get onto. Steve and Bucky stumble upon a strong enemy and manage to defeat him, but Bucky flies off the train and Steve fails to save him. The train is hijacked and Dr. Zoll is captured. He says that the Red Skull is preparing to strike the whole world at once. Schmidt equips the strategic bomber with powerful guided bombs. Peggy tries to console Steve, who is grieving for his friend. Schmidt is going to blow up the whole world to prove his dominance, and a special operation is being planned for Captain America to stop him. Steve sneaks into the base alone and is captured, but that was his plan. While the team deals with the soldiers, Steve pursues Schmidt, but he manages to get on the plane. Steve lacks speed, but the Colonel and Peggy come to the rescue. The girl kisses him before Steve jumps on the plane. He sneaks inside and destroys a couple of pilots, and even falls down with one, but he manages to get back. They start fighting and Schmidt wins, but at one moment he grabs the Tesseract with his hands and splits into atoms. After which the cube burns through the hull and falls into the ocean. Steve takes the helm and tells Peggy that the plane cannot be landed and he will have to sink it. She tries to dissuade him, but Steve makes his choice and decides to sacrifice himself. Before the end, he asks Peggy to dance and she agrees. The connection with Steve is cut off. The Colonel and Peggy realize that Steve is dead. The war ends, but Howard Stark continues to look for Steve. Captain America becomes a hero, but suddenly we are shown a living Steve. He wakes up in the hospital, but notices something is wrong. He has already heard this baseball game broadcast on the radio. He breaks through the wall and runs out into a strange room from which he gets out into the street and finds himself in modern New York. The head of the secret agency finds him and explains that Steve has been frozen in ice for 70 years, and Steve's only thought at that moment was that he never went to the dance. And this is where the film ends. Be sure to write your opinion about this in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell to be the first to watch a new video.